The bell over the road gate at Cold Haro rang for weather before it ever rang for men. I had lived under it long enough to know the difference. Wind gave it a loose, worried sound, like a thing talking in its sleep. A caravan gave it 3 hard strikes and then silence, because the drivers always caught the clapper on the third to spare their own ears. That morning it was neither. It rang once, flat and cold, the way it rings when something has come to the gate that does not know how a gate is meant to be used. I was already awake. I am always already awake. A cook at a way station learns to rise before the world has decided what kind of day it means to be, because by the time the first traveler stamps the frost off his boots and comes looking for something hot, the something hot has to already exist. There is no explaining to a cold, tired man that the broth is not ready. He does not want your reasons. He wants the bowl. So I had the ovens lit before the dark had thinned, and the big iron pot muttering over the coals, and my hands smelling of onion and marrow fat and the good ash of last night's fire. Cold Haro was not a grand place. I will not pretend it was. It was a fist of gray stone set into the shoulder of the Sarn Vale Range, at the last bend of the trade road before the passes climbed too high for wheels. Caravans stopped there because they had to rest the draft drakes, to grease the axles, to buy salt and rope, and a night out of the wind before the hard going. There was a stable long enough to hold 2 full trains of beasts, a bunkhouse that smelled of wet wool and men, a trader's counter run by old Corin who cheated no one but himself, and my kitchen. The kitchen was mine the way a nest is a bird's, not owned exactly, but shaped so wholly to me that no one else could have used it without breaking something. I had been the cook there 11 years. Before that I had been a cook other places, and before that I had been young, which is a country I no longer remember well. I had no husband to bury and no children to lose, and I had made my peace with that a long way back, the way you make peace with a mountain, not by winning against it but by stopping the fight. I fed people. That was the whole of my work and the whole of my worth, and I had come to think it was enough. I still think so. Most of what I know about mercy I learned from a pot of broth, that it must be tended low and long, that you cannot rush it, and that the poorest thing thrown in will still, given time and heat, give up something good. I say all this so you will understand what kind of woman took in the runt. Not a brave one, not a wise one, just a woman with a warm oven and the habit of not letting things die on her floor if she could help it. The caravan that came through that morning was a Highland breeder's train, and I knew it for what it was before I saw a single face. You could hear it in the drakes. Draft drakes, the big dull haulers, they groan and shuffle and complain like old men. But a breeder's train carries stock, young dragons bound for the Highland ranches where the wealthy bought them for their courts and their hunts, and stock makes a different sound. Thin, high, frightened. A caravan of frightened young things has a music to it that goes straight up your spine and sits at the base of your skull, and I have never learned to like it. The breeder's man came into my kitchen stamping and blowing, a tall fellow named Vashit with a good coat and a bad face, one of those faces that has decided the world owes it something and means to collect. He wanted the hot, and I gave him the hot, and he ate it standing at my counter with his gloves still on, which I have never forgiven in a man. He talked while he ate. His kind always does. He talked about his losses. The pass had been cruel, he said. He had gone in with a strong lot of molt stock and he was coming out short. Cold had taken 2. A third had thrown itself against a crate slat in the night and broken something and would have to be culled before the buyer saw it, because a buyer will pay for a whole thing and not a broken one. And there was the runt. He said runt the way another man might say rot. Came out wrong, he told me, wiping his mouth on the back of his glove. Twist in the foreleg from the shell, won't feed proper, half the color of the rest. I've been carrying it 3 weeks out of pure spite, hoping it'd have the decency to die and save me the rope. He laughed at that. It was not a good laugh. You take in strays, they tell me. Down the road they said that cook at Cold Haro, she'll warm any half-dead thing you hand her, she can't help herself. He looked at me then, and there was a challenge in it and a cruelty, and under both of them, I think now, a kind of test he did not know he was setting. Want it? It's yours. Save me the walk to the midden. I should tell you I said something fine. I did not. I said, bring it in out of the cold then before you talk any more about it. He laughed again and went out and came back with a crate and set it on my floor by the ovens with the carelessness of a man setting down a thing he has already decided is worthless, and he ate the rest of his breakfast, and he paid, and he left. I remember he left 3 coppers short and I did not chase him for it. I was looking at the crate. Inside the crate was the smallest dragon I had ever seen up close, and the coldest living thing. You have to understand what I knew of dragons then, which was next to nothing that mattered. I knew the draft drakes, the great patient haulers, the way a farmer knows an ox, by its harness and its temper, not its soul. I knew there were wild flights in the high peaks, the true dragons, the old ones, the Sarn Vale that the range was named for, and I knew you did not go up where they were and they did not come down where you were, and that was the whole and comfortable arrangement between us. I had seen them only as shapes at a great height, wheeling in the last light, too far up to be anything but weather with wings. I did not think of them as kin to the thing in the crate any more than I thought of a hawk as kin to a hen. But this thing on my floor, even I could see it was not stock, not really. It was a hatchling, not long out of the shell, no longer than my forearm from nose to the base of its tail, and it was made all wrong for the world it had been born into. The scales that should have shone were dull as cold ash, gray going to a sick, dusty no color, so that the whole animal looked as if it had been rolled in a dead fire. One foreleg was curled against its chest and would not straighten, the joint turned in on itself, a shell twist just as the man had said. Its wings were still soft, half-furled, damp-looking, the fine skin of them webbed between spars thin as reeds, and it was shaking, not the shiver of cold alone, the deep whole-body shudder of a thing that has decided, somewhere below thought, that living is more trouble than it is worth, and is letting go by inches. It looked at me. That is the part I cannot make anyone understand who was not there. It lifted its head off the crate boards. It took everything it had to do it. I could see the cost. And it looked at me with one eye the color of a banked coal. And there was nothing in the look but the plain question that every dying thing asks of every living thing that comes near. Are you the end, or are you the reprieve? I have been asked that question by dying men and dying beasts, and I have not always had a good answer. And I have learned that, when you do not have a good answer, you must at least not lie. So I did not coo at it or promise it anything. I knelt down on my old knees on the cold stone slow, so as not to frighten it, and I said the truest thing I had. Well, I said, you're not dead yet, let's not settle it this morning. And I picked up the crate and set it on the warm bricks by the oven mouth, where the heat pooled and lay, and I went back to my broth, because I had a bunkhouse of men to feed, and the world does not stop being hungry because one small thing is trying to die on your floor. I did not expect it to live. I want that understood. I have warmed a great many half-dead things by that oven: kittens, a fallen fledgling, a lamb a storm had orphaned, once a courier's dog that had run itself to ruin carrying a letter that turned out not to matter, and most of them died anyway, warm, which is at least better than dying cold. I did what I did for the run out of habit, not hope. Habit is an underrated thing. A great deal of the good that gets done in this world gets done by people who have simply made a habit of not walking past. But it did not die that morning. It took a little broth from my finger. I dipped my finger, and it worked its small, hard mouth against it, and swallowed, and that swallow was the first argument it made for staying. By midday it had lifted its head on its own. By evening, when the bunkhouse had eaten and gone to their bunks, and the kitchen was mine again in the good long quiet of the day's end, it had crept to the near corner of the crate, the corner closest to me, and put its chin on the boards, and was watching me move about with the flat, unblinking attention of a thing that has decided you are the most interesting object in a very small world. That night I did the thing I had not meant to do, which was I named it. You do not name what you expect to bury. But I was tired, and it was watching me, and its dull gray hide had gone warm at last under the oven heat so that it had stopped its terrible shaking, and when I passed the crate it made a sound, not a roar. Nothing like a roar, a small, rising cheep, absurd from a thing with claws like a kettle just short of the boil. And I said without deciding to, all right, Pip. I hear you, Pip, because it was small and because the sound it made was a small sound. There is no grander reason than that. I have heard since that other people, learned people, believed the creature I raised must have had some old and secret and rightful name, a name out of the high molt, a name in the tongue the ridge flight keeps. Maybe it did. But to me it was Pip, from a tired woman's mouth on a cold night, and it answered to Pip until the day it could have burned Cold Hero to the ground with a breath and did not, and it answers to Pip still, when it comes. The leg was the first real work. I am not a healer, but I have set a bone or two in men who could not wait for a proper one to reach us over the pass, and a joint is a joint. I studied the twist for 3 days before I touched it, watching how Pip moved, how it favored the limb, whether the bone had knit already or only sat wrong and might yet be coaxed. On the 3rd night I decided the shell twist was not healed hard but held soft, the way a green branch holds a bend, and that if it set the rest of the way as it was, Pip would go through its whole life dragging that leg like a grudge. So I did what my grandmother did for lambs. I warmed the limb long in a cloth soaked in the water I had boiled willow bark in, until the joint gave a little, and I straightened it slow, with Pip's coli fixed on me the whole while and a sound coming out of it that I felt in my teeth. But it did not bite me. It did not pull away. It let me, and I have thought since that this was the moment the whole of it turned, though I did not know it then. I splinted the leg straight with 2 flat spoons off Corin's counter and a wrapping of clean linen, and I bound it, and I sat up the rest of that night with the runt's head in my lap while it shivered off the hurt, and I told it the kind of low nonsense you tell a thing in pain, and toward dawn it slept, and its leg was straight. It healed straight, crooked at the very last knuckle of the joint, a little so that even now if you know to look you can see one claw sits not quite true, but straight enough to run, straight enough to grip, straight enough to fly. I did not know then that I had straightened the foreleg of a prince. I thought I had straightened the leg of a stray. There is, I have decided, no difference in the doing. The mending is the same whether the mended thing is worth a copper or a kingdom. Only the telling changes after. Weeks went by, the way they do at a way station, measured out in caravans and weather. Pip grew. It grew faster than I would have believed if I had not watched it. The broth thickened to meat, and the meat to whole rabbits Corin's traps gave up, and Pip ate the way growing things eat, with a total and shameless devotion to the next mouthful. The soft wings hardened and spread and dried into true wings, ribbed and taut, and Pip discovered them the way a child discovers its hands, with alarm and then delight, knocking my crockery off the shelves in the learning of them until I hung the crockery higher. It learned the kitchen. It learned me. It learned the road gate bell and would go tense and low-bellied at the flat cold ring of it and press against my skirts, because the bell had brought it once and it had not forgotten what the bell could carry. And it shed the ash. That was the strangest thing, and the thing I understood least, and the thing that in the end undid the whole comfortable arrangement between the mountain and the road. The dull gray no color that had covered Pip head to tail, that had made the breeder's man name it half the color of the rest and worthless, it came away. Not all at once. In flakes and sheets, the way a scald peels, over the better part of a month, and I swept it up off my kitchen floor every morning like fine cold ash from a fire, and thought nothing of it. But under the ash the true hide came up, and the true hide was not gray at all. It was the color of a coal at its deepest heart. A red gone so dark it was nearly the color of old blood, of garnet, of the last light left in a fire an hour after you think it's out, and shot through it, along the ridges of the spine and the leading edge of the wings and a broad blaze up the throat. A vein of pale living gold that caught the oven light and threw it back so that in the evenings, when the kitchen was dim and the fire low, Pip seemed to be lit from the inside. I thought it was beautiful. I did not think it was dangerous, did not think what it meant, that a hatchling should be born under a shellash, hidden, and come out garnatan gold beneath. I only thought I had somehow been given the handsomest stray in the range, and I was, in my quiet way, proud of it, the shameful small proud way you are proud of a thing you have kept alive. Other people knew what it meant faster than I did. The first was a drake handler off a salt caravan, a leathery old man named Ost who had worked beasts his whole life and had the eye for them. He came into my kitchen for his bowl and saw Pip curled in the warm corner where the crate had been. The crate was long gone. Pip slept on a folded blanket now like a dog, and old Ost went still with his bowl halfway to his mouth, and he set the bowl down and he said, very low, "Woman, what is that?" "That's Pip," I said. "Mind your feet, he's asleep." "That's no drake," Ost said. He had gone a color I did not like. "That's no ranch stock, no hauler, no hunt beast. Look at the throat, look at the gold, woman." He was whispering now as if Pip might wake and hold him to account for it. "I've worked this road 40 years. I've seen the flights up on the ridge at distance. That color, that's high molt. That's Sarn Vale blood. That's a wild one. That's an old blood one. Where did you get it?" "A breeder threw it away," I said. "Said it was a runt. Said it was worthless and half dead, and would I take it off his hands?" Old Ost looked at me for a long moment, and then he did a thing I did not expect. He laughed, not the breeder's ugly laugh, but a low, amazed, almost frightened laugh, the laugh of a man who has watched a joke turn over in his hands and become something holy. "Threw it away," he said. "Threw it away." He shook his head. "Woman, I don't know what you've raised by your oven, but somebody threw away a thing they'll spend the rest of their days wishing back, and you fed it broth." He would not stay after that. He took his bowl outside to eat, and he kept looking back at my door, and he left at first light a day early, and I understood later that old Ost had gone out of Cold Haro carrying a story, and a story, once it is walking, cannot be called back. The story walked fast. Stories about worth always do. Within the month, the breeder's man came back. Vashit, the same bad face, the same good coat, though the coat looked less good to me now that I knew the man inside it. He did not come stamping and blowing this time. He came smiling, which was worse. He had heard, he said. Word had reached him down the road, a curious thing, a marvel, the cook at Cold Haro keeping a garnatan gold hatchling with a blaze up its throat. Old molt color, rare color, valuable color. He laughed his ugly laugh, sat himself down at my counter with his gloves still on, and got, at last, to the point, which was that there had, he said, been a mistake. "You'll understand," he said, in the reasonable voice men use when they are about to take a thing from you, "the animal was never really given. A thing said in temper over breakfast, you took it too much to heart. The runt is stock, my stock, bred and carried at my cost. And now that it's turned out," he waved a gloved hand at Pip, who had woken and gone low-bellied and silent in the corner, watching Vashit with a coal eye that had, I noticed, no fear in it at all, only a flat and ancient attention. "Now that it's turned out fine, well, I've come for what's mine. I'll even pay you for the feeding. That's fair. That's more than fair." He set coins on my counter, a neat stack, more money than I had held at one time in 11 years at Cold Haro. I looked at the coins for a while. I will not tell you the money meant nothing to me. I was a poor woman getting old in a cold place, and there was a great deal I could have done with that stack, and there is no dignity in pretending otherwise. I looked at it honestly, the way I look at everything. Then I looked at Pip. He was pressed into his corner, and the road gate bell had not even rung, but he knew, he had known the moment Vashit's voice crossed my threshold, and he was making no sound at all now, which was worse than any cry, because Pip made sound about everything, and his silence meant he had gone somewhere old and cold inside himself, back to the crate, back to the ash, back to the deciding whether living is worth it, and I could not have that. I found I simply could not have it. "You called him worthless," I said. "I was mistaken," Vashit said pleasantly. "Men are sometimes." "You said you'd been carrying him 3 weeks hopping he'd die," I said. "You told me to save you the walk to the midden. You laughed." The pleasantness thinned. "Old woman." "You gave him to me," I said, "in front of my counter out of your own mouth. 'It's yours,' you said. I have a witness. Old Corin was at his counter. He heard every word. He'll say so. You gave him away because you thought he was going to die and cost you rope, and now he's lived and turned handsome. You'd like him back. But that's not how giving works. You don't get to give a thing away when it's dying and take it back when it's well. That's not a trade. That's just theft with better weather. I pushed the stack of coins back across the counter toward him. Take your money, I said, and go. He's not stock. He was never stock. He's Pip and he lives here. I want to be truthful about what this was and what it was not. It was not brave, exactly. Vashit was a bigger man than me and a worse one, and if he had decided to simply take Pip, there was little enough I could have done, an old cook with a soup ladle. It was not brave. It was only stubborn, and stubbornness is a poorer cousin of courage that has saved more lives than courage ever did, because it does not require you to feel no fear. It only requires you to plant your feet. I planted my feet. And Vashit, I saw it cross his face. Vashit did the arithmetic that cruel and greedy men always eventually do, which was the arithmetic of witnesses and roads and reputation, of a traitor named Corin who would talk and a story already walking, and he decided in the end that a garnet hatchling was not worth becoming the man who robbed the cold hero cook in front of the whole trade road. He took his coins back. He put them away slow, to show me it was his choice and not mine. He stood. At the door he turned. You've no idea what you're holding, he said, and for the first time all morning there was something true in his voice, something almost like fear. You think it's a pet. It's not a pet. Things like that, they get found, old woman, sooner or later, and when the finding comes you'll wish you'd taken my money and been shut of it. He went out. The bell did not ring for him. He was careful going to catch the clapper. He was right about one thing. The finding came. It came at dusk. 11 days later, on a still evening at the turn of autumn when the sky over the passes had gone the deep bruised blue it goes before the first hard cold, and I was banking the ovens for the night, and Pip was in the yard. He went out into the yard most evenings now. He was too big for the kitchen to hold his restlessness, near the size of a large hound at the shoulder though longer, and the wings folded over his back like a dark cloak, and he had begun in the last weeks to test them. Short hops, a clumsy skimming glide from the stable roof to the midden and back, all crash and enthusiasm that made the caravan men laugh and me hold my breath. That evening he was in the yard trying his wings against the still air, and I had come to the door to call him in for the night, and I had my mouth open to call, and I did not call, because the whole world had gone wrong in the space of a breath. Every beast in Cold Hero had gone silent. The draft drakes in the long stable that groan and shuffle without cease silent. The salt caravan's haulers silent. A hush had come down over the way station like a hand laid flat over a candle, and into that hush came a sound I had felt before only as weather. A vast, slow, rhythmic beat, high up and coming lower, the beat of wings the size of sails. They came down out of the last light off the ridge, and they were the Sarn Vale, and I had been a fool ever to think of them as weather. I cannot make you see it as I saw it. Words are too small. There were 7 of them, and the least of the 7 was larger than my whole kitchen, and they came down in a wide, slow spiral over the yard with the dying sun red on their hides. And their hides were garnetan gold, every one, the same deep old blood red shot with living gold that I had swept up off my kitchen floor in flakes and thought was ash. 7 great dragons the color of my Pip, come down out of the mountain onto the stones of Cold Hero, folding wings that each could have shadowed the whole yard, settling with a weight I felt come up through the soles of my feet, and lifting their heads, and looking, all of them, every ancient eye, at the small garnet creature standing frozen in the middle of my yard with his clumsy wings half open, and his crooked-heeled foreleg planted on the cold stone. The men of the caravans had come out. I heard them behind me, a dozen hard-rode men, and I heard the sounds they made, the oaths cut off, the fumbling for weapons that then hung useless in their hands, because there is no weapon on a trade road that means anything at all to 7 Sarn Vale, and every man there knew it. I heard someone weeping low. I heard someone praying. I saw Vashit. He was there. He had come back through. His caravan was in the yard that night, and I have wondered since whether the story he carried was part of what brought the flight down. I saw Vashik go to his knees on the stones, not in reverence but in pure animal terror, his good coat in the frost, his hands over his head, waiting to be burned. They did not burn anyone. I need you to hold on to that. There was no fire. There was no battle, no charge, no spectacle. The most powerful things I have ever seen came down into a yard full of the men who traded and mocked and discarded their kind, and they did not so much as scorch a single hair, because that was not what they had come for. They had come for the small one. They had come, at long and impossible last, for the lost one. And when I understood that, when I saw the way the greatest of them was looking at my Pip, I understood all of it at once, the ash and the throwing away and old Ost's frightened laugh and Vashit's fear, and my knees went out from under me, and I sat down hard in my own doorway. The greatest of them came forward. She was old. I knew she was old the way you know a mountain is old, not by any one mark but by the total weight of her. She was the largest and the darkest, her garnet gone almost to black with age, her gold dimmed to the color of a very old ring, and she was scarred, a long white seam down one side of her throat, a notch bitten out of one wing's trailing edge, a milkiness come over one eye. She moved through the frozen yard with a slowness that was not weakness but a terrible care, the care of something so strong it must move gently or break the world by accident. And she came to my Pip, and she lowered her enormous scarred head down, 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 until her great blind white eye and her one good cold dark eye were level with him, and she looked at him, and a sound came out of her. It was not a roar. In all of it there was never a roar. It was a low, broken, rolling sound, felt more than heard, that went on, and I have no word for it in the tongue of men except the one my heart supplied, which was grief. It was the sound a thing makes when it has looked for something across years and had stopped in the private rooms of itself, truly believing it would ever be found, and has been wrong, and is glad past bearing to be wrong. She put her scarred brow very softly against my Pip's small garnet chest. And Pip, my Pip, the runt, the throwaway, the half-dead thing that had asked me at my oven whether I was the end or the reprieve, Pip made his small sound back. The kettle cheap. The absurd little rising note I had named him for. He made it up at that ancient scarred immensity, and he pressed his crooked foreleg against her jaw, and I understood that whatever she was to him, mother's mother, matriarch, queen of the whole high flight, the off-stage power of every story old Ost had ever half believed, she was, to Pip, simply found. Simply the thing that had been missing from a world he had not known was missing anything, because the only world he had ever known was a warm corner by a stranger's oven, and that had been, God help me, enough for him. He had been happy. That is the part that has never stopped undoing me. He had been happy with me, with the broth and the blanket and the crockery hung high, never knowing he was a lost prince of the mountain, never grieving a crown he did not remember. It was only the flight that had grieved. He had simply been loved by a cook, and had thought that was how the world was. Then the scarred matriarch lifted her head from Pip, and she turned it slow, and she looked at me. I have been looked at by the powerful before. It is mostly an unpleasant experience. This was not that. She looked at me across the frozen yard. An old woman sat down in a doorway with an apron on and flour on her hands and no idea in the world of what to do, and there was in her ancient milk-can coal gaze no threat and no demand and no grandeur that meant to make me small. There was only a question, the same question, I swear it, that Pip had asked me from the crate on that first cold morning: are you the end, or are you the reprieve? Except she was not asking it of me. She was asking it for him. She was asking what I had been to the small one in the time he was lost. Whether the world, in the person of the nearest human hand, had been the end for him, or the reprieve. I did not have grand words. I never do. I got up off my knees slow, my old joints protesting, and I stood in my doorway and I told her the truest thing I had, the way I had told Pip on the first morning, because I have learned that the powerful and the dying want the same thing from you, which is not to be lied to. He was cold, I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to. And he was hungry, and somebody threw him away like he was nothing. So I warmed him and I fed him and I fixed his leg the best I knew how and I gave him a name and I kept him. I found my eyes had gone hot. I didn't know what he was. I want that said plain so nobody thinks I did it for reward. I didn't know he was yours. I thought he was a stray nobody wanted. I'd have done the same either way. That's just what you do when a small thing's dying on your floor and you've got a warm oven. You don't leave it in the cold. Anybody would. That was not true, the last part. Not anybody. Vashit would not have. The world is full of men who walk past. But it is the thing I believed in that moment, and I think the believing of it is the whole of what she had come down the mountain to find out. The scarred matriarch of the Sarn Vale held my eyes for a long, long moment. And then she did a thing that I have never spoken of to more than a handful of souls, because it is the kind of thing that, told wrong, sounds like a boast, and it was the furthest thing from a boast that has ever happened to me. She did not kneel. I have heard the story told down the road that the whole flight of the Sarn Vale knelt in the Cold Haro yard to a cook, and I tell you plainly it did not happen and I would not want it to have happened. There is something in the picture of it that shames the thing that truly passed. She did not kneel, and I would not have wanted her to. What she did was smaller and larger both. She lowered her great scarred head a second time, not to Pip now, but to me, and she brought it down slow across the yard until the vast dark curve of her brow, the brow that had a white scar seam down it older than my whole life, came to rest, feather-light, impossibly gentle, for the space of 3 heartbeats, against my flour-dusted hand where it hung at my side. An old thing that could have unmade the mountain, laying its hurt and its gratitude against a cook's hand as softly as Pip had, that first night, laid his chin on the crate boards. The same gesture. Prince and matriarch, the least and the greatest of the old blood, both of them come to the same small human hand for the same small human warmth, and finding it and being, I have no other word, answered. Then she lifted away, and the moment was over, and it was full dark, and the yard was very cold and very silent and full of men on their knees. They did not take Pip that night. I have thought a great deal about why, and I have decided it was mercy, not to me, though it was that too, but to him. He was still half a hatchling. He had lived his whole short life by a warm oven, and he did not know the high cold places, or the tongue of the flight, or any single thing about being what he was born to be. And the matriarch, who had grieved him lost for however long a Sarn Vale grieves, was not going to tear him a second time out of a warm place into a cold one for the sake of her own long ache. She was old enough and had lost enough to know better than that. So they left him. 7 Sarn Vale rose off the stones of Cold Haro into the bruised autumn dark and beat away up toward the ridge. And the last of them, the scarred one, went slowest, and turned her white eye back once toward my lit doorway and was gone. And Pip came in for the night and ate his supper, and slept on his blanket by the oven as if nothing at all had happened, as if the queen of the mountain had not just laid her brow against his chest, because to him she was not the queen of the mountain. She was the found thing, and I was still the warm thing. And in the ranking of a young dragon's heart the warm thing and the found thing sat side by side, and the crown did not enter into it at all. He grew up, of course, they always do. That is not sorrow, that is only weather. Over that winter and the spring that followed, the flight came for him not to take but to teach. It began with the scarred matriarch alone, dropping into the yard at dusk to sit, enormous and patient, while Pip clambered over her like a pup over a hound, and I watched from my doorway with my heart in a strange twist, half proud and half breaking. Then others came. They taught him the high air. They taught him to catch the ridge winds and stand on them, to fold and stoop and open, all the things a garnet prince must know, and he learned them fast, faster each week, and each week he was a little more the thing he had been born to be, and a little less the small crashin' crockery creature of my kitchen. I will not pretend that was easy to watch. Loving a thing well means aiming it in the end, at a sky you cannot follow it into. I had known that when I straightened his leg. You do not splint a wing to keep it, you splint it so it can leave. He went to the ridge for good on a bright hard morning at the height of the following summer, near a year to the day since a cruel man set a crate on my floor and called the thing inside it worthless. The whole flight came down for him that morning, and this time there was no fear in the yard, because by then the whole trade road knew the story and had made a kind of peace with it, and men came out not to cower but to see. Pip was grown, not to his full growth, that takes years I will not live to see the end of, but grown past the kitchen, past the yard, past me. He was beautiful. God, he was beautiful, garnet dark and gold-veined and strong, his crooked-knuckled foreleg the only sign left of the ash and the crate and the dying, and I would not have had that one crooked knuckle straightened for all the gold on the ridge, because it was the mark of my hand on him, the one thing of mine he would carry up into a sky I could not go. He came to me before he went. He was too big now to come indoors. He put his great garnet head down to the level of my doorway, and I stood in it, an old cook a year older, and I put my hand flat on his warm, scaled brow, the way I had put it on him 100 cold mornings, and he made his sound. The kettle cheap. Grown lower now, a great deep rolling version of it, but the same sound, the small, absurd rising note I had named a runt for on a night I did not expect him to see the morning. He made it against my hand, and I said what you say. I said, "Go on then, Pip, go on. You've a whole sky to be worthless in." And I laughed so I would not do the other thing, and he knew the laugh. He had heard it 1,000 times over the crockery, and I like to think it was the last of my kitchen he carried up the mountain. An old woman laughing in a doorway so she would not weep. Then he went. He rose with the flight into the bright hard summer air, garnetan gold among garnetan gold, one of 7, then one of 8, indistinguishable at last from the old blood he had been born to and thrown away from and returned to, and the whole of Coldharrow stood in the yard and watched the Sarn Vale carry my Pip home, and I stood in my doorway with flour on my hands and did. In the end, the other thing after all, quietly, where no one much could see. That was some years ago now. I am still the cook at Coldharrow. I am older, and the joints are worse, and I have taken on a girl to help me with the ovens because there are mornings my hands will not do what I ask of them, but I am still here, and the broth still mutters over the coals before the dark has thinned, and the road gate bell still rings for weather and for men. The flight remembers. I want to end on that because it is the truest thing and the warmest, and because I have grown tired of the way the story gets told down the road, all kneeling and crowns and reward, none of which is the part that matters. Here is the part that matters. The Sarn Vale do not come down to the road. They did not before Pip, and they do not now. The old arrangement holds. They keep their high cold places and we keep our low warm ones, and that is as it should be. But every morning in the gray before the dawn, when I light the ovens and set the broth to mutter and go to my door to look at the weather the way a cook does, there is, high up over the shoulder of the mountain in the last of the dark, a single great garnet shape, wheeling slow. Too far up to be anything but weather with wings, unless you are the one old woman on the whole trade road who knows exactly what you are looking at, and why it comes, and whose smoke it is dipping low to catch a breath of before it climbs back into a sky I gave it. He was cold and hungry, and somebody threw him away like he was nothing. So I warmed him. That is the whole of it. That is the whole of what I ever did. And the greatest flight in the mountain still bends its wing, each dawn, over the chimney of a cook.